The conference hall on Epsilon Crest Station gleamed with polished metal and flickering holograms. Representatives from 40 different species had gathered to witness something that happened only once every decade, a demonstration of Remnite's properties. The material was legendary across the galaxy, forged in the crushing gravity of collapsed stars, and for 3,000 years, nothing had ever damaged it. Commander Hannah stood near the back of the observation deck, her arms crossed as she watched the presentation. She didn't particularly want to be here. Diplomatic missions weren't her strength. She preferred the straightforward work of running her ship, the resilience, and keeping her small crew safe. But the Coalition had requested human presence at major events, and her ship had been closest to Epsilon Crest when the invitation arrived. Beside her, Deho shifted his weight from foot to foot. Her chief engineer was fascinated by the demonstration, his eyes wide as the researchers subjected a plate of Remnite to increasingly extreme forces. Lasers that could cut through starship hulls left no mark. Projectiles that could pierce armor plating bounced off harmlessly. Pressure that would compress diamond into powder didn't even scratch the surface. Incredible, Deho whispered. If we could figure out how to manufacture this ourselves. We can't, Hannah replied quietly. It takes conditions we can't replicate. That's why it's so valuable. On the other side of the room, Admiral Voss watched the demonstration with two of his 4 arms folded behind his back. The Kelthurian commander was a veteran of 60 campaigns, and his species had been part of the Coalition for over a millennium. He glanced at Hannah occasionally, his large eyes unreadable. Humans still made the elder species nervous. They were new, unpredictable, and didn't fit neatly into the established hierarchies. Counselor Thane stood near the demonstration platform, his crystalline body refracting the light into rainbow patterns across the walls. The Luminar species were scientists and philosophers, and Thane had personally advocated for humanity's inclusion in the Coalition 50 years ago. He believed diversity strengthened the alliance. Not everyone agreed with him. The lead researcher, a thin gray-skinned Valorian named Kess, adjusted the settings on the testing apparatus. For our final demonstration, we will subject the Remnite to a plasma cascade normally found only in the corona of active stars. Please observe. The containment field around the test platform shimmered as superheated plasma began to swirl around the Remnite plate. The temperature readings climbed to numbers that made Deho suck in his breath. Hannah could feel the heat even through the shielding, a wave of warmth that made sweat bead on her forehead. Then something went wrong. The containment field flickered. Just for a moment, just a brief stutter in the energy flow, but it was enough. The plasma surged outward, and alarms began screaming throughout the observation deck. Researchers scrambled backward. Admiral Voss was already shouting orders, his military training taking over instantly. Hannah's eyes tracked the expanding plasma wave. It would hit the support column in approximately 4 seconds. The column was rated to withstand the heat, but the sudden temperature differential would cause stress fractures. She knew this because she'd studied engineering before switching to command track. She could see the angles, calculate the failure points, and she realized with cold certainty that when that column buckled, it would fall directly into the crowd of researchers trying to evacuate. She didn't think. Thinking took too long. Hannah ran forward while everyone else ran back. She grabbed a piece of loose metal debris from a supply cart and wedged it under the column just as the plasma wave hit. The metal in her hands glowed red-hot instantly. She ignored the pain, ignored the screaming warnings from her nervous system, and leveraged all her weight against the makeshift brace. The Remnite support beam groaned. She could feel it shifting, the enormous weight beginning to topple. Hannah planted her feet, adjusted her grip on the burning metal, and pushed back. Her muscles screamed. Her bones felt like they might snap. But the beam stopped moving. It held, suspended at an angle, while the researchers cleared the area beneath it. Daho appeared at her side, along with 2 security officers. They added their strength to hers, and together they guided the beam down to a safe angle where it couldn't hurt anyone. The moment the last researcher was clear, Hana let go and staggered backward. Her hands were blistered and raw, but the pain felt distant, unimportant. Minho, her medical officer, was already moving toward her with a kit. "Commander, your hands." "I'm fine," she said automatically. "Check the researchers. Make sure no one was caught in the blast." Admiral Voss approached, his expression somewhere between impressed and confused. "That was extremely brave, Commander, and extremely foolish. You could have been killed." Hana shrugged. "But I wasn't. Is everyone else okay?" "Thanks to you, yes." Voss studied her for a long moment. "Your species continues to surprise us." The cleanup took 3 hours. Emergency teams secured the plasma leak, repaired the containment systems, and began the tedious work of documenting what had gone wrong. Hana sat in the medical bay while Minho treated her burns, listening with half an ear to his gentle scolding about safety protocols. It was Counselor Thane who brought the news that changed everything. The crystalline being entered the medical bay with unusual urgency, his body pulsing with agitated colors. "Commander Hana, you need to see this." He led her back to the observation deck, where a team of engineers had gathered around the fallen support beam. They stepped aside as she approached, and she could see what had captured their attention. The Remnite beam, that unbreakable material that had withstood 3,000 years of testing, showed multiple fracture lines running along its length. "That's impossible," Daho said, appearing at her shoulder. "Remnite doesn't crack." "It can't crack." One of the engineers, a methodical Drexian named Haru, turned to face them. "We've analyzed the stress patterns. The fractures occurred during the incident, not from the plasma exposure. The thermal load was well within tolerance levels." He paused, his 6 eyes blinking in sequence. "The fractures appeared at the exact points where maximum physical force was applied. The implications hung in the air like a physical presence." Admiral Voss stepped forward, his voice carefully neutral. "Are you suggesting that Commander Hana's intervention caused damage to Remnite? With her bare hands and a piece of scrap metal?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Haru replied. "I'm stating what the evidence shows. Something created stress fractures in a material that has never been damaged by any known force in the galaxy. The only variable in this equation is the human commander's direct physical intervention." Hana looked at the fractured beam, then at her bandaged hands. She'd pushed hard, yes, but she was just human. Humans were strong for their size, but they weren't superhuman. They didn't break star-forged metal with their bare hands. That wasn't possible. "It must have been already weakened," she said. "Maybe a manufacturing defect or damage from previous tests." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. The engineers knew it too. Remnite didn't have defects. Remnite didn't get damaged by previous tests. Remnite was, by definition, unbreakable. Until today. Counselor Thane's body shifted through colors that Hana had learned indicated deep thought. "This requires investigation. Commander, would you be willing to participate in some controlled tests? Nothing invasive, simply observations to help us understand what happened here." Hana wanted to refuse. She wanted to return to her ship and forget this whole incident. But she could see the fear beginning to form in some of the observers' eyes. Fear of the unknown. Fear of what humans might be capable of. If she refused to cooperate, that fear would only grow. "I'll help however I can," she said finally. "But I don't think you'll find anything special. I'm just a person who pushed when pushing was needed." Admiral Voss made a sound that might have been agreement or skepticism. "Perhaps. But the galaxy's strongest material broke when you pushed it. That is not just anything, Commander. That is a question that demands an answer. As they filed out of the observation deck, leaving the engineers to their analysis, none of them noticed the small detail that Haru would discover hours later during his detailed examination. The fracture patterns in the Vremnite weren't random. They radiated outward from the contact points in a pattern that suggested not just force, but sustained, directed pressure beyond anything the material was designed to withstand. The beam hadn't failed because it was weak. It had failed because something impossibly strong had refused to let it fall. The testing facility was sterile and cold, filled with equipment that hummed and beeped with alien purpose. Hana stood in the center of a circular platform, electrodes attached to her skin at dozens of points, while scientists from 6 different species monitored displays and murmured to each other in languages she didn't understand. This was the 3rd day of testing, and her patience was wearing thin. "Squeeze the grip as hard as you can," instructed a Valorian technician, handing her a device covered in sensors. Hana squeezed. Numbers appeared on nearby screens. The scientists made notes. They'd done this same test yesterday, and the day before. The results hadn't changed. Deho watched from the observation gallery above, his arms crossed and his expression worried. Minho sat beside him, reviewing medical data on a tablet. Her crew didn't like this any more than she did, but they understood why it was necessary. The coalition needed answers, and fear of the unknown could be more dangerous than any physical threat. Counselor Thane approached the platform, his crystalline form catching the harsh laboratory lights. "Commander, I apologize for the repetitive nature of these tests. We're trying to establish a baseline for human physiology under normal conditions. And what have you found?" Hannah asked, stepping down from the platform and removing the electrodes. "Anything that explains how I supposedly broke Vremnite?" "Not yet," Thane admitted. "Your strength is impressive for your size, and your bone density is remarkably high, but nothing we've measured explains the incident. You're within expected parameters for a human of your build and training." Admiral Voss entered the laboratory, his footsteps heavy despite the low-gravity setting. He'd been observing the tests remotely, but something had clearly drawn him here in person. "Counselor, we need to discuss the next phase." Thane's colors shifted to cautious orange. "We agreed to non-invasive testing only. I'm not suggesting we harm her," Voss said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with what he was about to propose. "But perhaps the issue isn't physical capability under normal conditions. Perhaps it's what happens under stress." Hannah felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of stress?" "Psychological stress," Voss explained. "During the incident on Epsilon Crest, you were trying to save lives. You were acting under extreme urgency. We need to recreate those conditions to understand what changes in your physiology." "You want to put me in danger," Hana said flatly. "No," Thane interjected quickly. "We want to create the perception of danger. Simulations. Virtual scenarios where you believe someone needs saving, but no actual risk is involved." They ran the first simulation that afternoon. Hannah entered a virtual environment where she could see a child trapped under debris. The child wasn't real, she knew that, but the program was sophisticated enough that her brain struggled to maintain that certainty. She moved toward the debris and tried to lift it. The simulation provided appropriate resistance based on the weight of virtual materials. She failed. The debris was too heavy. The child's cries for help grew more desperate. Hana tried again, straining against the virtual weight, but her strength wasn't sufficient. The simulation ended with the child still trapped. "Interesting," one of the scientists murmured. Her adrenaline levels increased, but only moderately. Heart rate elevated but remained within safe parameters. No unusual muscle recruitment. They ran 5 more simulations. Each time, Hannah tried to save the virtual victim. Each time, she failed because the scenario was designed to require strength beyond what the baseline tests had measured. Each time, her physiological responses stayed within normal human ranges, though it was Minho who identified the problem. "She knows it's not real," he said from the observation gallery. "Her conscious mind accepts the urgency, but her subconscious recognizes the simulation. You're not going to trigger whatever happened at Epsilon Crest with virtual danger." "Then what do you suggest?" Voss asked. Minho hesitated. "Real danger, but controlled. A situation where someone actually needs help, where Hannah knows the stakes are genuine." The room fell silent. What Minho was proposing was risky, potentially dangerous, and ethically questionable. It was also probably the only way to get the answers they needed. Counselor Thane was the one who broke the silence. "My assistant Kale has volunteered." Kale was young for a Luminar, barely into his second century. He stood before the assembled scientists and commanders with quiet determination, his crystalline body glowing a steady, calm blue. "I understand the risks," he said. "I'm willing to help." They designed the scenario carefully. Kale would be placed in a sealed chamber with a Remnite barrier between him and the exit. The chamber would begin filling with a gas that was mildly toxic to Luminars, enough to cause discomfort and respiratory distress, but not permanent harm. Hannah would be brought to the chamber and told that she needed to free Kale before the gas concentration reached dangerous levels. The real danger was minimal. They assured everyone. Kale would be monitored constantly. If anything went wrong, they could evacuate the gas instantly and remove the barrier mechanically. But Hannah wouldn't know that. As far as she would understand, Kale's life would depend on her ability to move an immovable object. They brought Hannah to the testing chamber without explaining what was happening. She saw Kale through the transparent wall, saw the Remnite barrier in front of him, saw the yellow-green gas beginning to seep into his section of the chamber. She understood immediately. "What is this?" she demanded, spinning to face Counselor Thane. "A test," Thane said quietly. "The gas is not immediately lethal, but Kale will suffer if he remains exposed. The barrier is pure Remnite. You have approximately 10 minutes before the gas concentration becomes dangerous." "This is insane," Hannah said. "I can't move Remnite. You've seen the tests. I'm strong, but I'm not that strong." "Perhaps not under normal circumstances," Voss said. "But circumstances on Epsilon Crest were not normal. Try, Commander. For Kale's sake." Hannah wanted to refuse, wanted to demand they end this experiment immediately. But she could see Kale's breathing becoming slightly labored, could see the way his glow was dimming as his body reacted to the toxic gas. Whether this was ethical or not, whether it was fair or not, there was a person who needed help. She approached the Remnite barrier. It was a solid plate, seamlessly integrated into the chamber wall, approximately 2 meters tall and half a meter thick. She placed her hands on its smooth surface and pushed. Nothing happened. She tried finding leverage, tried wedging her fingers into the microscopic gap between the barrier and the wall. The Remnite didn't budge. Behind her, she could hear the scientists monitoring her vital signs. Heart rate increasing, adrenaline spiking, normal stress responses. She was trying, but trying wasn't enough. Then Kale coughed. It was a wet, painful sound that sent alarms shooting through Hannah's nervous system. She looked up and saw him clutching his throat, his glow flickering. The young Luminar was suffering, and she was failing to help him. Something shifted inside her. She didn't understand it, couldn't explain it, but she felt something fundamental change in how her body responded to the situation. Her hands tightened on the Remnite. Her muscles engaged not with the normal, controlled recruitment that training taught, but with a totality that defied every safety limit her physiology normally. Enforced thought the monitoring equipment and the observation gallery went haywire. Her muscle fiber activation just jumped to 98%. Someone shouted. That's impossible. The body doesn't allow. Her bone density is increasing. Another scientist interrupted. Real-time changes. I'm seeing calcium redistribution. The barrier, Minho whispered. Look at the barrier. The Vremnite was groaning. Not metaphorically, but actually producing a sound like metal under stress. A deep vibration that shouldn't exist because Vremnite didn't experience stress. Hairline cracks appeared at the edges where Hannah's hands gripped the material. Then larger cracks. Then fractures that spread like lightning across the surface. Hannah pulled. The Vremnite shattered. She stumbled backward, pieces of the galaxy's strongest material falling around her feet. Kale scrambled out of the chamber, coughing but alive. Medical teams rushed to him immediately, but he waved them off. His glow already returning to normal. Hannah stood among the broken pieces of Vremnite, her hands unmarked, her breathing heavy but controlled. She looked at Counselor Thane, at Admiral Voss, at all the scientists staring at her with expressions ranging from awe to fear. What am I? She asked quietly. Nobody had an answer. In the observation gallery, displays showed physiological data that made no sense. Muscle recruitment levels that should have torn her body apart. Bone density changes that should take months of treatment to achieve, happening in seconds. Metabolic rates that should have caused her cells to burn out, somehow sustained without damage. Neho descended from the gallery and approached his commander carefully, like she might break. Hannah, he said softly, how do you feel? She considered the question, checked herself for pain, for damage, for any sign that what she'd just done had cost her something. Fine, she said, and it was true. I feel fine. That was perhaps the most terrifying answer of all. The emergency session of the Coalition Council convened in a secure chamber deep within Epsilon Crest. Representatives from the major species sat in a circle. Their attention focused on the holographic display showing footage of Hannah shattering the Vremnite barrier. The video had been watched 17 times already. Each viewing brought new questions and no answers. This changes everything, declared Vornis, the reptilian delegate from the Sethrek Collective. His scales rippled with agitation. If humans can break Vremnite with their bare hands, what else can they do? Should we be allowing them unrestricted access to Coalition facilities? To our military installations? Commander Hannah saved lives on Epsilon Crest. Counselor Thane replied, his crystalline body pulsing with frustrated red. She volunteered to help us understand this phenomenon. She is not a threat. You don't know that, Admiral Voss said quietly. The Keltharian commander had been unusually silent during the debate, but when he spoke, others listened. We don't understand what we witnessed. Until we do, caution is warranted. The debate continued for hours, going in circles, until Thane proposed a different approach. Instead of speculating about what humans might be, perhaps we should investigate what they are. Their history, their evolution, the environmental factors that shaped their species. Knowledge dispels fear. Voss considered this. I'll assign Commander Jiho to lead the investigation. He's human himself, part of the first generation born in Coalition space. He'll have insights we lack. Jiho was surprised to receive the assignment, but he understood its importance. He was in a unique position, being both human and enough removed from Earth to view his species with some objectivity. He set up a workspace in the Resilience Conference Room and asked Deho to assist him. We need to understand human evolution, Jiho explained, pulling up Earth's geological and biological records. Every species is shaped by their homeworld. What made humans the way they are? Deho started with the basics. Earth was a garden world by most standards, rich in resources and biodiversity. But it was also chaotic. Extreme weather, active tectonics, dramatic climate shifts. Humans evolved during a period of intense environmental instability, he noted. Ice ages that lasted thousands of years, then sudden warming periods. The climate never stayed predictable, so they adapted to change itself, Jiho murmured. What else? They dug deeper. Earth's evolutionary history was violent. Humans shared their world with predators that outmatched them in every physical category. Faster, stronger, better armed with claws and fangs. Early humans had no natural weapons, no armor, no physical advantages. They should have gone extinct, Deho said, reading through the data. Multiple times. Instead, they became the dominant species. How? The answer lay in a combination of factors. Intelligence, obviously. Tool use, social cooperation. But there was something else, something that appeared repeatedly in human historical and medical records. They called it different things in different eras. Battle fury, hysterical strength. The adrenaline response. Jiho found documentation from Earth's medical journals. Thousands of years of recorded incidents. A mother lifting a ground vehicle off her trapped child. A man moving a boulder that should have required machinery. A firefighter carrying 3 people out of a burning building, despite injuries that should have incapacitated him. Always in emergencies. Always to save others. Always performing feats that physiologists said should be impossible. It's a survival mechanism, Deho realized. Most species evolved with safety limits to prevent self-harm. Humans have those limits too, but they also have the ability to override them. Jiho pulled up comparative physiology data. Every species restricted their muscle use to a safe percentage of maximum capacity. Use too much strength, and you tear tendons, fracture bones, damage your own body. The limits were evolutionary adaptations to prevent self-destruction. Humans had the same limits. Under normal circumstances, they use perhaps 30% of their theoretical maximum strength. But the limits weren't absolute. In extreme situations, the human brain could unlock the restrictions. 50%. 70%. In rare cases, nearly complete muscle fiber recruitment. The cost must be enormous, Deho said. You destroy your own body. You would, Jiho agreed. And humans do. Every documented case of hysterical strength resulted in severe injuries afterward. Torn muscles, damaged joints, stress fractures in bones. The body pays the price for exceeding its limits. But Hannah didn't, Deho pointed out. She broke Remnite twice and walked away without injury. That's what doesn't make sense. They brought their findings to Minho, who had been conducting detailed medical examinations of Hana. The medical officer listened to their research, then pulled up Hana's comprehensive health records. Look at this, he said, highlighting sections of the data. Hana's medical history shows extensive childhood injuries. Multiple healed fractures, evidence of severe malnutrition during developmental years, scar tissue throughout her muscular system. He pulled up her personnel file. She grew up in the aftermath of the Pacific Northwest disaster on Earth, orphaned at age 8 when a tectonic event destroyed her city. She survived for 6 years in the ruins before rescue teams reached the area. During that time, she was responsible for protecting and feeding a group of younger children. The picture became clearer. Hana hadn't suddenly developed the ability to exceed her limits. She'd been doing it since childhood. Again and again, in situations where children's lives depended on her, she'd pushed her body beyond what it should have been able to do. Her body adapted, Minho explained. Each time she broke through the limits, each time she damaged herself and healed, her physiology changed slightly. Enhanced bone density to prevent fractures. Reinforced connective tissue to handle extreme loads. More efficient muscle fiber recruitment. She essentially trained her body to withstand the very thing that should destroy it. Jiho sat back, processing this information. So she's not an anomaly. She's an example of what humans become when necessity demands it. More than that, Daiho added. If her body could adapt like this in childhood, with no medical intervention, what could other humans achieve under similar circumstances? The implications were staggering. Humans weren't naturally stronger than other species. They weren't superhuman. But they had the capacity to become superhuman when protecting others. And their bodies can adapt to sustain that capacity. Jiho compiled their findings into a comprehensive report. He included the evolutionary data, the medical evidence, the historical records. He tried to be objective, to present humans as just another species shaped by their environment. But he couldn't escape one conclusion. Humans were dangerous. Not because they wanted to be, not because they were aggressive or warlike, but because when threatened, when protecting something they cared about, they could temporarily transform into something beyond their baseline capabilities. He presented the report to Admiral Voss and Counselor Thane in private before it went to the full council. Voss read it in silence, his forearms perfectly still. When he finished, he looked at Jiho with an expression the human commander couldn't quite read. This report will frighten people, Voss said finally. I know, Jiho replied. But it's the truth. Is it complete? Thane asked. Have you explained everything we witnessed? Not everything, Jiho admitted. I can explain why Hana can exceed normal human limits. I can explain why her body adapted to sustain that capacity. But I can't explain the mechanism. When she broke the Vremnite, something happened at a cellular level that our instruments barely captured. Real-time adaptation on a scale that shouldn't be possible. Evolution compressed into moments, Thane murmured. Fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. Before they could discuss further, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency alerts flashed on every display. Voss was already moving toward the command center, his military instincts overriding everything else. What's happening? Jiho called after him. Voss paused at the door, his face grim. Unknown vessels just entered the system. Dozens of them. They're not responding to hails, and their weapons are charging. The debate about humanity's capabilities became suddenly irrelevant. The crash had arrived, and philosophical questions about human potential would mean nothing if none of them survived the next few hours. In her quarters aboard the Resilience, Hannah felt the ship's alert klaxons and immediately began gearing up. She didn't know what was coming, but she knew her crew would need her. She knew people would need protecting, and protecting people was what she did best. No matter what it cost her. The galaxy was about to learn exactly what humans were made of. Not through controlled experiments or careful analysis, but through the oldest test of all, survival. The crash fleet emerged from jump space like a swarm of locusts, their ships organic and pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. Epsilon Crest's long-range sensors counted 47 capital vessels and hundreds of smaller craft, all moving with the coordinated precision of a hive mind. Admiral Voss stood in the command center, his forearms working multiple control stations simultaneously. Ray shields. All defensive batteries to ready status. Evacuate non-essential personnel to the inner sectors. Admiral, they're broadcasting on all frequencies, the communications officer reported. It's the same message in every known language. The message was simple and absolute. Surrender or be annihilated. No negotiation. No terms. Just compliance or death. Counselor Thane's crystalline form pulsed with agitated colors. We should attempt dialogue. Perhaps they can be reasoned with. I've fought the crash before, Voss said quietly. They don't reason. They don't negotiate. They consume everything in their path. He turned to his tactical team. How long can we hold? The tactical officer, a methodical Drexian named Haru, ran the calculations. The station's Vremnite reinforced hull should withstand their initial assault for several hours. Our defensive weapons will inflict casualties, but their numbers are overwhelming. I estimate we can hold for 18 to 24 hours before shields fail. And reinforcements? 3 days minimum. The nearest coalition fleet is responding, but they won't arrive in time. Voss's expression hardened. Then we evacuate who we can and make our stand. Every hour we hold is an hour for civilians to escape. He activated the station-wide communication system. All personnel, this is Admiral Voss. We are under attack by hostile forces. Begin emergency evacuation procedures. Priority goes to civilians and non-combat personnel. Military personnel will hold defensive positions. On the Resilience, Hana gathered her crew. Daeho checked weapon systems, while Minho prepared the medical bay for incoming casualties. Jiho joined them, his expression grim. "The Kresh don't take prisoners," he said. "Once they breach the hull, it's going to be close-quarters combat. Brutal and fast." "Then we don't let them breach," Hana replied. She pulled up the station schematics. "The civilian sectors are here. If the Kresh break through the outer defenses, they'll push through these corridors to reach the evacuation points. We need to hold them at the choke points." "With what?" Daeho asked. "We're a science vessel. We have small arms and a crew of 20. Then we'll need to be smart about where we fight." Hana studied the map. "This bulkhead here, between sectors 7 and 8. It's Vremnite reinforced and designed to seal in case of hull breach. If we can hold that position, we can buy time for the evacuation." Jiho nodded slowly. "I'll request volunteers. Won't have trouble finding them. Everyone on this station knows what the Kresh do to captured populations." The Kresh attacked 3 hours later. Their ships moved in coordinated waves, absorbing the station's fire without breaking formation. Energy weapons that should have crippled their vessels seemed only to slow them. Kinetic projectiles that punched through their hulls were sealed within minutes by some kind of biological healing process. "They're regenerating," Haru reported, disbelief in his voice. "Their ships are alive. They repair damage faster than we can inflict it." The first boarding pods hit the outer hull at 1800 station time. Shaped like massive spears, they punched through the armor plating and disgorged hundreds of Kresh soldiers. The creatures were insectoid, roughly humanoid in shape, but covered in chitinous armor and wielding weapons that seemed grown from their own bodies. The station's security forces met them with disciplined fire. But the Kresh didn't retreat. They didn't take cover. They simply advanced, accepting casualties that would break any normal military force. Pushing forward with relentless determination, Hana reached the bulkhead in Sector 7 with her team and the volunteers Jiho had recruited. 15 people total, representing 6 different species. They set up defensive positions and sealed the Vremnite bulkhead behind them, trapping themselves between the advancing Kresh and the civilians they were protecting. "Remember," Hana said, checking her weapon, "we're not trying to win. We're buying time. Every minute we hold is another evacuation ship that gets away." The Kresh reached their position 20 minutes later. The first wave crashed against their defensive line like water against rocks. Hana fired controlled bursts, each shot precise and efficient. Beside her, Jiho coordinated their fire, creating overlapping fields that maximized their limited firepower. The Kresh fell, but more took their place. Always more. "They're not slowing down," one of the volunteers shouted, a young Valorian whose name Hana hadn't learned. "There's too many." "Hold position," Hana ordered. She could see the fear in their eyes, could feel it herself. But fear was irrelevant. People were depending on them. The battle became a desperate grind. Minutes stretched into hours. Their ammunition ran low. Volunteers fell to Kresh weapons. dragged back to cover by their companions. Minho worked frantically to stabilize the wounded, but his supplies were limited. Then the Crash brought up something new. It looked like an organic cannon, grown from the same material as their ships. They aimed it at the Vremnite bulkhead and fired a stream of viscous liquid that hissed and smoked on contact with the metal. The Vremnite began to dissolve. "Bioacid?" Daiho said, horror in his voice. "They're melting through the bulkhead." Hana watched the acid eat through the galaxy's strongest material like it was paper. Behind that bulkhead were 10,000 civilians waiting for evacuation ships that might not come in time. If the Crash breached now, those people would die. She made her decision. "Everyone back to the evacuation point," she ordered. "Help Minho with the wounded." "Go now." "Commander, we can't leave you," Jiho protested. "Yes, you can," Hana said firmly. "Get everyone out." "That's an order." Daiho grabbed her arm. "Hana, you can't hold this alone. You'll die." She met his eyes, and he saw something there that made him release her. Not resignation, not desperation, but absolute determination. "I'm not going to die," she said quietly. "I'm going to hold this line until every civilian is evacuated. However long that takes." "The bulkhead is failing," Minho said, his voice breaking. "Hana, please. Go," she repeated. "Trust me." They went because she'd given them an order and because they'd seen what she could do. But Daiho looked back, and what he saw would stay with him for the rest of his life. Hana stood alone at the melting bulkhead as the Crash swarm approached. She wasn't holding a weapon anymore. She discarded it as useless for what she was about to do. The first section of the bulkhead collapsed, dissolved completely by the bioacid. Hana moved to the gap and braced herself in the opening, her hands gripping the edges of the still solid Vremnite. The Crash saw her and recognized a keystone, a single point of failure. They concentrated their assault on this one human standing between them and their objective. Hana didn't move. The weight of the failing structure pressed down on her shoulders. The acid vapor burned her lungs. Crash weapons tore into her armor, drawing blood. She felt her body beginning to fail under the impossible strain. And then she felt something else. That same shift she'd experienced in the testing chamber, but magnified 1,000 times. Her body responding not just to danger, but to absolute necessity. Her muscles recruiting every fiber. Her bones reinforcing themselves in real time. Her metabolism shifting into something that shouldn't be biologically possible. Another section of the bulkhead dissolved. Hana shifted her stance and held it up with her back, her arms. Her entire body serving as the structure that should have been steel and star-forged metal. In the evacuation bay. Counselor Thane was monitoring the biometric data from the tracking device Hana still wore. His crystalline body flared with colors no one had ever seen before. "What is it?" Admiral Voss demanded. "She's transforming," Thane whispered. "Her cellular structure is changing. Real-time evolution in response to stress. This shouldn't be possible. Nothing in known biology supports this. Is she dying?" Voss asked. "I don't know," Thane admitted. "The readings are beyond anything I can interpret. She's become something else." At the bulkhead, Hana held. The Crash threw everything at her. She didn't break. They increased their numbers. She didn't fall. They brought heavier weapons, and she absorbed impacts that should have pulverized her. She wasn't thinking anymore. Thought required processing time she couldn't spare. She existed only in the moment, only in the singular purpose of holding this line until her people were safe. Everything else fell away. Pain, fear, doubt. Only purpose remained. "Last ship is loading," someone shouted over the comm. 30 seconds. 30 seconds. She could hold for 30 seconds. She could hold for eternity if she had to. The final evacuation ship lifted off. packed with civilians who would live because one person refused to let them die. In the command center, Admiral Voss gave his final order: detonate the station's reactor core. Better to deny the Kresh their prize than let them have it. Jiho and Daeho, watching from the evacuation ship, saw Minho running back toward the failing bulkhead. They chased after him, found him grabbing Hana and pulling her away from the collapsing structure. She fought them at first, her mind still locked in the moment, still believing she needed to hold. The evacuation fleet jumped to safety just as Epsilon Crest's reactor core detonated. The explosion consumed the station and most of the Kresh fleet in a blast of nuclear fire that would be visible for light years. It was a Pyrrhic victory, but a victory nonetheless. In the medical bay of the Resilience, Hana lay on a bed while Minho ran every scan he had available. Her crew stood nearby, watching with expressions that mixed relief, awe, and something close to fear. "How is she?" Admiral Voss asked, entering the medical bay. He transferred to the Resilience to personally oversee the aftermath of the battle. "Alive," Minho said, still staring at his instruments in disbelief. "Not just alive, recovering. Her body is already repairing the damage. Torn muscles regenerating. Fractured bones knitting back together. She should be in intensive care for weeks. Instead, she'll probably be walking around by tomorrow." Counselor Thane materialized beside the bed, his crystalline form pulsing with scholarly fascination. "I've reviewed the biometric data from the battle. What she did should have killed her. The forces involved, the cellular stress, the metabolic demands, it defies everything we know about biology. But she's human," Jiho said quietly. "And humans defy expectations." Voss studied Hana's sleeping form. "I need to understand this. Not just for the Coalition's sake, but because the Kresh will return. They always do. And next time, we may not have a station to sacrifice." Thane projected his data onto the medical bay displays. What we witnessed was adaptive evolution occurring in real time. When Hana experienced extreme stress combined with absolute necessity, her body didn't just access hidden reserves. It restructured itself to meet the demand. "How?" Daeho asked. "How is that possible?" "All species have evolutionary potential," Thane explained. "Normally it takes generations to manifest. Environmental pressures select for beneficial traits over thousands of years. But humans appear to have compressed that process. When truly tested, when protecting something they value, their bodies can trigger rapid cellular adaptation. It's not unique to Hana," Jiho added, pulling up his research. "It's a human trait, part of their evolutionary heritage. They evolved on a world that changed faster than normal adaptation could handle. So they learned to adapt quickly or die." Minho pulled up cellular scans showing Hana's muscle tissue. "Look at this." During the battle, her muscle fibers weren't just contracting, they were restructuring, changing their composition to handle loads they couldn't normally support. Her bone density increased by 30% in under an hour. Her metabolism shifted to process energy at rates that should cause cellular burnout. "And she survived it," Voss murmured. "Not just survived, she's recovering with no apparent long-term damage. Because she's done this before," Minho explained. "Her body has learned to handle these transformations. Each time she pushes her limits, she expands what those limits are. It's like exercise on a fundamental level. Stress, adaptation, recovery, stronger than before." The implications settled over the group like a heavy blanket. If one human could do this, what could thousands do? What could millions do when their worlds were threatened? Hana woke the next morning feeling surprisingly normal. Her body ached, but it was a manageable ache. Nothing like what she'd expected after holding up a collapsing structure for who knew how long. She sat up and found Admiral Voss waiting in a chair beside her bed. "Commander," he said formally, "how do you feel?" "Like I was hit by a ship," she admitted. But alive. How many did we get out? 9,742 civilians. Another 3,000 military personnel. The crash losses were total. We destroyed their entire assault fleet when the station detonated. Good, Hana said. Then, quieter. How many did we lose? 137 defending the evacuation. Another 43 in the initial assault. Voss paused. It would have been far worse without you. Without what you did. Hannah looked down at her hands. They were bandaged, but underneath the wrappings, she could feel new skin growing, raw but healthy. What did I do, exactly? I remember holding the bulkhead, and then... It gets fuzzy. Voss stood and moved to the window, looking out at the stars. You held a collapsing structure for 47 minutes. You withstood concentrated fire from hundreds of crashed soldiers. You absorbed impacts that should have pulverized you. And you walked away. I don't understand how, Hannah said. None of us do, Voss admitted. But Counselor Thane has a theory. Would you like to hear it? Thane entered the medical bay on cue, his crystalline form glowing with gentle blue light. Commander Hannah, I'm pleased to see you recovering. I wanted to share what we've learned, if you're willing to listen. Hannah nodded, and Thane began his explanation. He spoke of evolution and adaptation, of human history and the environmental pressures that shaped them. He talked about the ability to override safety limits and the capacity for rapid cellular change. He showed her data from the battle, readings that even she could see were extraordinary. The question everyone keeps asking, Thane concluded, is what are you made of? But I think that's the wrong question. The right question is, what are humans capable of becoming when they absolutely must? And the answer? Hannah asked. Something remarkable, Thane said simply. Something we've never encountered in all our studies of intelligent species. Humans aren't the strongest race. You're not the fastest, not the toughest by baseline measures. But when pushed to the absolute limit, when protecting something you care about, you can temporarily become something beyond your normal capabilities. At what cost? Hannah pressed. This can't be free. Minho stepped forward. Normally, the cost would be severe. Permanent damage, possibly death. But you've adapted to withstand your own extremes. Your body has learned to handle transformations that would destroy most humans. You're unique, but not impossible. Other humans could develop similar capabilities under similar circumstances. Jiho added his perspective. We found records of other humans throughout history who demonstrated similar abilities. Soldiers who continued fighting with injuries that should have been fatal. Rescue workers who performed impossible feats during disasters. Parents protecting children. Always in moments of extreme need. Always temporary, always costly. But the capacity exists in your species. Admiral Voss turned from the window to face Hana directly. The Coalition Council has been debating what your capabilities mean for humanity's role in our alliance. Some are frightened. Some are awed. But I've made my recommendation, and the Council has accepted it. What recommendation? Hannah asked warily. That humanity be granted full membership in the Coalition Security Council, Voss said. That humans be integrated into our defensive forces, not as auxiliary personnel but as frontline defenders. Because the crash will return, and when they do, we'll need people who understand how to hold the line past all reasonable limits. Hana absorbed this. You want to use us as weapons? No, Voss said firmly. We want to stand beside you as allies. The difference is crucial. You've shown us something we didn't know we needed. The willingness to break yourself so others don't have to. That's not something to exploit. It's something to honor and support. Over the next weeks, as the Coalition fleet regrouped and the survivors of Epsilon Crest were relocated to other facilities, the story of the battle spread. It was embellished in some tellings, minimized in others. But the core remained. A human commander had held a line alone against impossible odds, and thousands lived because of it. Engineers studied the fragments of the Remnite bulkhead that had been recovered before the station's destruction. The stress patterns told a story of forces that exceeded anything the material was designed to withstand. They filed their report with a note that would become famous in coalition circles. Material failure occurred due to applied forces exceeding theoretical maximums. Further investigation into human-operated equipment recommended. But in the quiet corridors of Coalition Command, among the military officers who had witnessed the defense firsthand, a different saying emerged. It was simple, spoken with a mix of respect and something close to reverence. Remnite is the strongest material in the galaxy, until a human needs it not to be. Hana returned to active duty 3 weeks after the battle. Her crew welcomed her back with quiet celebration, though Deho couldn't quite hide his worry when he looked at her. She was still Hana, still their commander, but they'd all seen what she could become when necessity demanded it. "Do you think they'll ask you to do it again?" Deho asked one evening in the ship's mess. "Push yourself like that?" Hana considered the question. "I hope not," she said honestly. "But if they do, if people need protecting, and I'm the one who can do it." She shrugged. "Then I'll do what needs doing." "That's what scares us," Minho said softly. "Not what you can do, but that you'll keep doing it until it finally breaks you." "Maybe," Hana agreed. "But here's the thing about breaking. Sometimes you heal stronger than before. Sometimes the broken places become the strongest parts." She looked at her hands, remembering the feel of Remnite shattering beneath her grip. "I'm not special. I'm just willing to pay the cost that others shouldn't have to. That's not unique to me. That's human. All of us, when pushed far enough, when protecting something we love, will break ourselves before we break our promises."